They built 200 condos on my grandfather's grave, and the HOA president fined me for ruining the view. Tow trucks at midnight, threats of foreclosure. A $10 million trophy pool gleaming over buried family and a stolen drainage line. I had a deed, a map, and one rule: law over chaos. They had power suits, secret chats, and a plan to crush me with fines until I broke. I didn't break, I documented, I fought back. And what I uncovered turned their luxury into liability. Stay to the end to see how I used the law to make their pool kneel to the swamp and win real justice. Drop a like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sunrise hit the condo glass like a firing squad. The pool below lay still, a perfect blue plate set over bone. My grandfather's bone. I parked at the curb, door still creaking when a clipboard blocked my path. Truck can't stay, the HOA president said. Cool perfume, cooler smile, violates aesthetic standards. I looked past her to the water. The edge ran infinity smooth toward a stand of manicured hedges that used to be our pasture. I could still see the split rail fence in my head, the sycamore, the small stone where we lowered him in 1946. Family ground. Family promise, final warning, she added, we'll tow. Midnight had already taught me that threat was real. Last week, a hook clanged on my axle at 2 a.m. while I slept. I stood shirtless in the yard, papers in hand, watching red taillights drag my lifeline away. No conversation, just policy. I set my backpack on the sidewalk, unzipped. Laid the original deed flat on the concrete so she could see the signature and the hand-drawn drainage line. A ribbon sketched in black ink running from the pasture swale to the creek. My great-grandfather's ditch, our land's artery. There's a family cemetery under your guest parking, I said, and a drainage easement you filled. She glanced without bending. If you believe that, prove it. The leaf blower across the courtyard throttled up. Gravel rattled in the vax belly. The pool's surface shivered, caught itself, and went mirror flat again. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, the kind that breaks things if you let it. Not today. You think fines can make me forget a grave? I asked. Fines enforce standards, she said. Nothing personal. The word personal hit like a slap. My grandfather's hands were in that soil. Mine would be too one day if the world were decent. I slid the deed back into its sleeve. Calm voice. Steady spine, law over chaos. If you tow my truck again, I said, you tow evidence and I'll add it to the record. Her eyebrows flicked. What record? The one I'm building. I walked the perimeter, slow, mapping the land with my boots. New curbs where the swale once drank storms. Fresh sod laid like a lie, a drain grate that went nowhere. I crouched and pressed my palm to the ground. It felt tight, overpacked, breathless. They had taken a pasture and turned it into a brochure. They had taken a family cemetery and paved it. And they had dared me to prove it while they stacked violation letters like bricks. So I did what you do when power dares you to blink. I didn't blink. I shot photos, corners, grades, seam lines, geotagged them, time-stamped them. I filmed the pool equipment room door, the padlocks, the tiny rattling pipes that fed the showpiece like veins feeding a face that's always smiling. I counted cameras, logged their angles, because if they were recording me, I'd record them better. Then I went home to a kitchen table and a lamp that hummed. I spread the deed, the obituary, the old family map, the county plat. A pencil traced the drainage line again and again until the page shone with graphite. I pulled a blank notebook. Wrote on page 1, they built on a grave, they blocked the swale. THEYTOWEDMY truck, prove it. Make IT public. Make it legal. Immediate war, I told myself. Aggressive, fast, but precise. Calculated revenge, not rage. Every move a receipt. By midnight, I had a plan and 3 thermoses of coffee inside me. Step 1, records. Step 2, witnesses. Step 3, pressure they can't shrug off. At 12:07 a.m., a tow truck idled by my driveway again. I stood in the porch light with a camera rolling and the deed ready. This time, the driver looked at the lens, swallowed, and drove on. The pool slept under the moon. But I could feel it breathing. And I promised the water and the bones under it that before this was over, it would tell the truth. The first letter hit like a mosquito you can't swat. Unapproved mailbox. Then non-conforming paint hue. Then boat trailer cited. I don't own a boat. Each envelope wore the same stiff font and the same threat. Pay or lien. They wanted me busy, broke, humiliated, death by paper cuts. I numbered every notice. Snapped photos, saved envelopes, certified my replies. When they fined me for parking 1 inch over a faded line, I measured the stripe with a ruler and sent the photo with a timestamp. When they claimed my grass was 4.5 inches, I filmed a tape measure bending at 3.75. Not to win with cleverness. To build a pattern. Retaliation isn't a feeling, it's a timeline you can lay on a judge's bench. By noon, I was at the county records office. Fluorescent lights buzzed like hornets. A clerk slid a stack of building files across the counter and pointed me to a microfiche reader older than I am. Permits, minutes, variances. I turned pages until my fingertips felt like sandpaper. I found the subdivision approval. A stormwater plan stamped received, but no post-construction monitoring. No archaeological survey for historic burial potential, despite this parcel's age and the church records I'd already pulled. My pencil stopped. There, on a yellowing page, existing farm drainage swale to be filled. Water to be conveyed through engineered landscaping features. A pretty phrase for a fake outfall. I filed a public records request for the HOA's pool discharge plan. The clerk's eyes flicked up. We don't keep HOA docs. The city does, I said, if they discharged into the right-of-way or altered off-site flow. She shrugged. Submit in writing. Back home, a tow truck idled at the corner. I lifted my phone, filming as a hook dropped. Driver, I called, voice even, you touch my axle, you're on the record. This is evidence in an ongoing matter. He looked past me. The HOA president stood by the hedges, arms folded. Board approved, she said. Show me the authority to tow from public curb, I answered. Silence. The hook rose. The truck rolled away. I scanned the deed. Emailed it to a church archivist who remembered my grandfather's funeral. Emailed it to a retired surveyor I'd found through a neighbor. Emailed it to an environmental attorney whose website didn't brag. It listed statutes like prayer beads. She called back at 8:11 p.m. I'm Tessa, she said, calm voice. Knife brain, tell me everything. I told her about the pool that had no overflow plan I could find, about the buried swale, about the fines stacked like cinder blocks. She listened without interrupting. Here's your path, she said when I finished. We build records, we file preservation notices for potential burials, we notify environmental regulators, we force daylight, no shouting, no holes. Law over chaos. I like the way she said we. We drafted letters that night, one to the county, one to the state DEP, one to the state historical office, each with exhibits, each with photos. Each with the line that is wait in court, we are placing you on notice. When I hit print, the house sounded like a press room. Fresh paper slid out with the smell of heat and ink. I stacked copies, stapled exhibits, labeled flash drives. I packed the box like it was a kit to rebuild a spine. At 2:13 a.m., my trail cam pinged. Motion at the pool service door. I opened the feed and watched a maintenance tech snake a hose across pavers into a rain garden made of decorative rock. Water hissed, night fog glowed. A secret bypass bleeding blue water into a bed that led nowhere lawful. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold. Then I wrote 3 words at the top of the next page, found the lie. Morning would bring more envelopes, more fake smiles, more threats, good let them. Paper cuts are loud when the judge hears them in a stack. Fighting alone exhausts you. Fighting with witnesses terrifies them, good. Pastor Ruth opened the church ledger with hands that never shook at funerals. There, she said, fingertip on a line from 1946. Bennett Burial Family Pasture. She wrote an affidavit that read like scripture, dates, names, the creek as a landmark, the sycamore as a witness. Signed before a notary. Stamped. Mr. Alvarez, retired surveyor, showed up with a transit and patience that could peel paint. We set stakes along the old fence line, eyes on the creek's bend, counting paces my grandfather would recognize. He shot the grade, shot the fall, nodded once. Water remembers, he said, and the words stuck in my chest like a nail through oak. Tessa called with a list. We file notice to the county, DEP, the Army Corps if wetlands are implicated, and the State Historic Preservation Office. We cite the statutes they ignored. We demand preservation of the suspected burial area and all hydrology. We prepare for retaliation. Already coming, I said, flipping through fresh finds. Good, she said. Pattern helps. The HOA board scheduled a meeting. I sat in the 3rd row, center aisle, camera rolling in my pocket. The president took the mic, face pleasant, language neutral. Misinformation has circulated, she said. We value truth. When they opened the floor, I walked up with a copy of the deed in a clear sleeve. I read my grandfather's name into their microphone, read the drainage easement line. Laid the church affidavit beside the agenda like a blade. The room got so quiet I could hear the AC return gasp. A board member kept his eyes on his hands. The property manager stared at the floor. The president held a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for your comments, she said, and moved on. That night my neighbor Shelley knocked with a thumb drive. You didn't get it from me, she whispered. But you need to see, board screenshots, a back-channel chat with the developer, phrases you can build a case on, bury drainage history, crush him with fines, keep appearances, and the one that flashed hot as a siren. If he pushes the grave story, we'll fine him into selling. I texted Tessa one screenshot. She replied with 3 words, litigation hold now. We served letters preserving evidence. We filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. No digging, no grading, no discharge outside permit terms, preserve the suspected burial area. We attached the deed, the affidavit, the survey notes, the midnight hose video. The courthouse felt like cold stone and old promises. The judge's bench towered. Tessa argued clean. Your Honor, this is not a neighborhood spat. This is hydrology, heritage, and retaliation. The HOA attorney spoke in phrases that sound good to newspapers and bad in transcripts. As-built conditions, long-standing approvals, community harmony. The judge leaned forward. Final approvals don't erase history or the law. He granted a limited TRO, preserve the site, no soil disturbance within a buffer, no discharge outside of permitted systems, agency inspections authorized. Walking out, I felt a pressure drop inside my chest. Not relief, orientation. We had a line to hold. We had law on paper. The next storm would be our witness. At home, I set trail cams along the faux rain garden. Bought extra batteries, charged every phone in the house. I slept in boots, woke every hour to check the feed. At 3:02 a.m., wind shook the hedges, thunder rolled, first drops hit the deck. I whispered a sentence to the dark that felt like a promise to the dead. Tomorrow, you won't be invisible. The storm didn't arrive, it attacked. Gutters howled. The pool's edge turned to a razor under sheets of rain. I was under the eaves at 1:11 a.m., camera live, when the first overflow hit the deck and ran toward the fake rain garden. It should have found an engineered outfall. It found decorative rock and an old swale's ghost. Water pooled, chlorine bit the air. The ground belched like a drowning lung. A maintenance tech sprinted from the pump room, head down, hose in hand. He cracked a valve and fed a river across pavers into the rock bed, exactly what our motion warned against. The trail cams caught every frame. The hiss was steady as a confession. By dawn, the DEP truck rolled up. A man in a raincoat knelt by the rock bed, fingers combing gravel, lifted them to his nose. He didn't smile, he wrote. He followed the hose back to the pump room, shined a light on a valve that wasn't on any plan. That, he said, not looking at anyone, is a problem. The HOA president arrived with a statement ready and eyes that said a different story. We have always complied, she told the inspector. This is routine maintenance. He didn't answer, he tagged the valve, he photographed the discharge, he asked for permits we knew didn't exist. Tessa handed him our packet. Midnight hose, she said, unpermitted bypass, retaliatory fines documented. He issued an immediate order, cease all unpermitted discharge, prepare a hydrology correction plan within 10 days. Protect the suspected burial site under state guidelines. He copied the judge. The judge expanded the TRO before lunch. Any overflow must be routed into a temporary containment basin on common land pending design of a lawful system, lined, monitored, supervised. A swamp, a board member blurted. A lawful basin, the inspector said. They built it fast because contempt is expensive. Black liner, sandbags, a ditch from the pool to the basin that cut a line of truth across their brochure. Neighbors filmed the backhoes. Kids asked questions their parents couldn't answer without saying the word grave. When the second storm hit, the maintenance tech didn't sneak a hose. He opened the tagged valve under the inspector's eye and watched millions of dollars of luxury water march into a plastic-lined swamp bowl with all the dignity of a river obeying gravity. The pool didn't look so infinite after that. It looked leashed. I walked the basin's edge, rain tapping the liner like drumsticks. The smell was wet plastic and exposed dirt, but under it I caught something older, mud like I remembered from my childhood pastures, the kind that squelches under boots and leaves prints that fill with brown water and tiny whirlpools. Tessa exhaled slow. They'll retaliate harder now. Good, I said. More pattern. We filed a preservation notice with the State Historic Preservation Office. We retained a ground-penetrating radar team, the county archaeologist, to supervise. We marked a grid beside the pool fence with blue flags that flickered like a flock of small birds. The HOA mailed me a fresh stack of fines that night: unauthorized filming, public nuisance, defamation by implication. I logged each. Numbered them, photographed the envelopes. The more they pressed, the cleaner the record. At midnight, I stood at the fence. The pool glowed apartment complex glamorous, blue as a movie lie. Past it, the basin swallowed overflow and gave it nowhere to hide. For the first time, the land had a voice louder than their letterhead. Calculated revenge isn't a punch, it's a valve that turns and never turns back. Law over chaos. Witnesses everywhere, paper that holds. And water, patient as scripture, moving exactly where it's allowed, now that we'd forced it to remember. Storm week didn't end, it reloaded. Clouds stalked the condos like debt collectors. I was at the fence when the second front broke. Water slapped the coping, crept across the deck, hunted downhill. The basin took its share like a disciplined soldier, but the land wanted more. Water-tested seams found old memories. I followed the sheen to the landscaped berm where the swale used to breathe. Decorative rock. Mulch that looked clean until rain stripped the makeup. The ground heaved a slow burp. Chlorine rose like an accusation. My trail cams blinked green in the hedges, quiet eyes taking everything. At 2:13 a.m., the pump room door opened. Same tech, same hose. This time he paused, glanced at the basin, then at the rock bed like a gambler weighing one more bet. He cracked a different valve. A hidden line coughed alive under pavers and fed a stream straight into the filled swale. Not to the basin, not to any permitted outfall, to the lie. The one they drew on pretty plans and sold as rain garden. I filmed from the shadows. No yelling, no heroics, just evidence. The hiss sounded like a secret begging to be promoted to fact. By morning, envelopes waited on my porch. Harassment, unauthorized surveillance, interference with operations. They wanted me swatting gnats while the river changed beds. I logged each one, date and time, then sent a single sentence through counsel. All further communications to attorney. Silence from their mailbox doesn't mean peace. It means they're burning fuel you can't see. I drove to Mr. Alvarez's shop. We rolled out a long tape, checked my stake spacing, laid out a clean grid along the lawn where memory said stop. He calibrated the ground-penetrating radar like a violin. The county archaeologist arrived with a clipboard and a face that had seen real history and wasn't impressed by brochures. We started at dawn. The GPR sled hummed, whispering microwaves into soil that had a better memory than any of us. The screen painted gray bands. Noise, roots, pipes, then two parallel hyperbolas, then another pair, same depth, same spacing. The archaeologist kept her voice even. Anomalies consistent with burials. I felt my throat close. Relief and fury tried to occupy the same square inch of chest. I swallowed both. Flag them, I said. Blue markers went in like stitches on a wound. The HOA called an emergency board update on the clubhouse patio. Neighbors gathered in raincoats. They tried to shift blame to legacy conditions, to contracted vendors, to anything without a name or a face. Then someone asked the question that cut through spin. If you knew, why find him instead of listen? A pause, a cough, a non-answer. Cameras caught all of it. The dep returned. They traced the illegal line beneath the pavers, tagged it, wrote more. The inspector said one sentence that changed the room's temperature. Any further unpermitted discharge will be treated as willful. Tessa filed an amended motion with our newfound spine. We attached the midnight hose video. The GPR stills, the church affidavit, the deed, the basin order. We asked for expanded protection, for a cultural monitor, for a formal preservation polygon, for sanctions if anyone so much as kicked a flag. Afternoon heat steamed off the liner at the basin, carrying that raw smell of disturbed earth and wet plastic. I stood there until the steam thinned and the air cooled. My phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. I'm on the board. I didn't sign up for this burner phone. I'll send you what they say off record. The first screenshot arrived a minute later. If Bennett won't fold, we crush him. There it was, the missing axis, not just bad systems, intention. Calculated revenge isn't anger pouring downhill. It's gravity turned into grade, every piece clicked into slope. Law over chaos, sworn affidavits, agency orders, hydrology that doesn't care about titles. And now purpose caught in writing with timestamps and names. The pool still shone like a salesman's grin. But the grin had blood on its teeth and we had more daylight coming. The DEP's letter wasn't a memo, it was a summons. 10 days to propose permanent compliance. 10 days to confess how water would move from now on. 10 days to rebuild respect you can't fake. They brought in engineers, clipboards, laser levels. We met them on site not to gloat, there's no win in that, but to witness. The basin glugged as yesterday's storm bled off through a controlled outlet. The temporary ditch carved across manicured turf, a scar you could learn from. Your outfall never existed, the inspector said monotone. You created a bypass and misrepresented it. The property manager tried a half-truth. We relied on contractors. Reliance isn't authorization, the inspector replied. A second GPR grid ran under the archaeologist's eye, same geometry, same depth. The preservation polygon widened. Orange stakes went in. A silt fence wrapped the area like an arm. The judge signed an expanded order within hours. No soil disturbance. Cultural monitor on call, overflow strictly to basin pending a lawful design vetted by regulators. Fines suspended for any owner engaged in protected activity related to the case. That last clause mattered. It said plainly, you don't get to use money as a weapon here. Retaliation spiked anyway. Anonymous notes on my windshield. Sell while you can. Graves belong in cemeteries, not progress. I took photos. I saved the paper in Ziplocs like forensic samples. Tessa stacked them into our growing spine. Patterns are louder than insults. Neighbors started crossing the street to talk. A nurse who'd been fined for a holiday wreath. A veteran whose truck got towed during chemo. A teacher who'd paid a penalty for a child's chalk drawings on a driveway. I wrote every story down, not because anecdotes win cases, because human cost keeps your aim steady. We convened on the basin's edge for a site walk with regulators, engineers, our surveyor, the archaeologist. The sun struck water trapped in the liner and flashed like 1,000 camera shutters. The engineer cleared his throat. We can tie the pool into the basin permanently with a vegetated treatment system, he said. Stone weirs, native plants, monitored discharge to the creek, it'll work. It has to do more than work, I said. It has to honor. No one argued. Even engineers understand that when land and memory share an address, design carries a moral. The plan on the table that week didn't just draw pipes, it drew respect. A restored drainage corridor where the swale once lived, a living wetland to polish overflow, a boardwalk to tell the truth in plain language. The HOA sent me one more stack of fines that night, as if habit couldn't quit itself. Unauthorized signage, loitering near amenity, public nuisance. I slid the envelopes into our evidence box without opening them. The act of logging them felt like turning a wrench one more quarter turn. At midnight, thunder rolled again. The maintenance tech appeared, looked at the tagged valve at the basin at the orange stakes protecting memory, and he did something we hadn't seen yet. He waited for the inspector. When the inspector arrived, he opened the correct line. The basin drank. The creek waited its turn. For the first time, every gallon followed the law without cheating. I sat in my truck with wipers ticking and spoke out loud to no one, to everyone. We're past halfway, I said. Not to victory, to clarity. Calculated revenge had become structured repair. Law over chaos had moved from a phrase to a system with pipes and plants and posts in the ground. The pool was still there, shining. So was the basin, now not a punishment but a promise. The land had a path again. And when land has a path, people can too. The morning after compliance began, the HOA threw its last heavy punch. A certified letter. Pay $18,600 in accumulated violations within 10 days or face lien and foreclosure. They wanted the fear back. They wanted me off balance. I set the letter beside our timeline and took a photograph with a ruler laid across the text. Then I called Tessa. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. Anti-SLAPP, retaliation under state statute. Injunction against collection pending litigation. And we demand a forensic audit of violations revenue. Subpoena the management company's books. We filed by noon. The judge issued a temporary bar on enforcement before dinner. Retaliation works until it meets daylight and deadlines. That night, the burner number pinged again. Devin, the board member whose conscience finally drowned out group chat bravado, sent a string of screenshots. Backchannel directives to bury drainage history, to control narrative, to break Bennett financially. Names, timestamps, emojis that look harmless until you put them under oath. Meet off-site, he wrote. Public place, I replied, 2 witnesses and bring the phone. We sat in a diner that still smelled like butter and burned coffee at midnight. Devin's hands shook. He wasn't a villain. He was ordinary, and ordinary people trapped in bad systems make bad moves. He slid the phone over. I screen-recorded the chats, scrolled slow, captured metadata. He told me about a friendly planner who fast-tracked approvals, about a consultant paid to solve problems when the old swale kept pushing water where it wanted. Why tell me now? I asked. He stared at the window's reflection like it might judge him. Because I have to live here, because I'm tired of lying to my kid about why our neighbor's truck got towed. We drafted a sworn statement, he signed. We added his screenshots to our evidence spine. Tessa smiled a little, the way a chess player does when the endgame reveals itself. Next move, ground truth the memory we'd mapped. Mr. Alvarez arranged an early morning GPR pass with the archaeologist supervising. We pushed the sled along our grid. The same shapes bloomed, parallel and quiet. The archaeologist marked them on a site plan and radioed the county. Preservation order appropriate, she said. Recommend expanding buffer. By afternoon, orange posts doubled. A laminated sign explained why. Suspected historic burials identified. Area protected under state law. Neighbors read with hands in pockets, heads bowed like at a graveside. No speeches. Just a shared understanding that silence can be respectful and also very loud. The HOA scheduled a meeting. The room filled beyond capacity. The property manager tried to control the microphone queue. It didn't work. Owners lined up with stories. Tow threats during chemo. Fines for wreaths. Penalties for chalk drawings. A woman held up a toddler's art with a violation stapled to it and said, "You did this." I called for a vote to recall the board under the statute the bylaws pretend owners never read. Enough signatures had been collected. The ballots went out. The room held its breath. When the projector flashed the tally, a low exhale rolled like surf. The recall passed. Devin looked like a man who just set down a truck. Relief and wreckage in one face. The property manager gathered papers with fast, angry motions. The president stared straight ahead, the way people do when they've been winning so long they forgot rules can change. The pivot wasn't victory. It was control of tempo. We weren't reacting anymore, we were directing. We submitted a formal petition for judicial findings, unpermitted discharge, hydrology restoration, cemetery protection, retaliation sanctions, fines reform. We asked the court to make temporary orders permanent and add teeth. We asked for a covenant over the burial polygon and a legal restoration of the drainage easement in perpetuity. In the parking lot afterward, rain started again, light, cool, almost relieved. I tilted my face up and let it hit my eyes. Almost, I told myself. Almost. By the time the news trucks rolled in, the site looked like a lesson plan. Orange stakes, blue flags, a basin swallowing overflow in disciplined gulps. GPR grids taped off like a crime scene that finally had detectives. Reporters asked for the easy line. I didn't give sound bites, I gave documents. The deed, the church affidavit, the preservation orders, the depth citations, the midnight hose video. If you want to beat spin, you hand people paper and let ink talk. The county issued a formal preservation order. The polygon tightened like a seatbelt. The archaeologist brought a magnetometer to cross-check the GPR. Same geometry, same depth, same silence from the ground that means present in a language older than ours. The HOA tried a press conference. We value history, they said. We have always complied. Cameras asked about the illegal bypass, about the retaliation timeline, about the chats Devon handed over. The answers wobbled. The footage looked worse than the script felt. Meanwhile, the DEP made the temporary basin official. Expand it, plant emergent vegetation, install stone weirs, monitor quarterly, discharge only after polishing. The plan didn't just talk about gallons. It mentioned frogs, dragonflies, filtration, temperature moderation, science catching up to respect. We hosted a site walk for the neighborhood, not a rally, a class. Mr. Alvarez explained grade with a mason's string tight from stake to stake. The archaeologist explained how radar reads emptiness as signal. The inspector explained why chlorine in gravel is a violation, not a vibe. People nodded, they asked hard questions, they took notes. Anger cooled into understanding and understanding hardens into will. At sunset, I stood at the flag that marked the longest reflection and felt my chest get tight again. Grief doesn't argue with law, it sits beside it and breathes slow. I laid a hand on the grass and said the name we'd fought to protect quietly because some names should only be said that way. Then we went back to work. Tessa finalized our filings for judgment, restore the historic drainage easement, convert the basin into a permanent vegetated treatment wetland, place a conservation covenant over the burial polygon, sanction retaliation. Order transparency reforms for fines, require third-party monitoring, fees and costs to the prevailing party. We didn't ask for drama, we asked for structure. That's how you build a win that outlives you. Drones buzzed overhead like metallic bees. Kids stood on scooters and watched water thread from pool to basin to outlet, a controlled path that felt like an oath. A neighbor tugged my sleeve. You think they'll ever admit it? They'll comply, I said. That's better. Night fell. The pool lights flicked on, casting that design blue across a deck that had learned obedience. The basin reflected stars. The creek downslope murmured to itself, a sound old enough to anchor an empire if you let it. A final message lit my phone, not a threat, a confession. I was wrong, Devon wrote. If you need me to speak under oath, I will. You will, I replied, and you'll sleep better. Calculated revenge had become public proof. The cameras could leave now and the truth would still stand, held in orders in stakes in a wetland that drank pride and returned humility. Law over chaos, water over lies, memory over convenience. And tomorrow, court, discovery doesn't blink. It doesn't care about smiles or spin, it opens boxes and lets paper speak. We wheeled file carts into Tessa's office until the hall smelled like toner and fear. Invoices to a consultant paid right before variance hearings. Emails with subject lines that felt harmless until you lined them up by date. Expedite legacy conditions, resolve concerns. The cadence of cover. We built a wall on the conference table, permits, minutes, bank ledgers. Tessa pinned colored flags like a general mapping artillery. Blue for drainage, red for retaliation, yellow for burial evidence, black for money. The pattern shouted, fill imported to erase a swale, no post-construction checks. A pool engineered to pretend it had an outfall. A hidden bypass feeding a fake rain garden. And in the margins, a machine for extracting obedience, violation mills, late fees, Leon whispers. Depositions began. The property manager sat under fluorescent mercy and wilted. We used the bypass at night. He tried to spread blame like butter. We relied on consultants. Tessa's voice stayed calm. Authorization, he swallowed. We implied. The court reporter didn't blink. Her keys clicked like a metronome counting down to judgment. Elaine entered with iron posture and answers filed to the edge. I don't recall. I wasn't copied. Our intent was community harmony. Tessa slid the burner screenshots across the table, Devon's receipts, timestamped malice. Bury drainage history, crush him, keep appearances. For the first time a crack, not in her voice, in silence, a beat too long, the kind of pause jurists notice. We filed a motion for sanctions and a petition to convene a special meeting under state statute. Owners needed a choice on record. The auditorium filled with folding chairs and anger dressed as calm. Microphones crackled. A nurse held up a violation for a Christmas wreath. A veteran showed towing photos dated the morning of chemo. A teacher read a $200 fine for chalkfish drawn by a 5-year-old. Each story landed like a hammer. No shouting, just testimony. Then I stepped up, steady breath, documents in a clear sleeve. I spoke of a deed written by a hand that worked soil for a living. A drainage easement sketched when men solved floods with shovels and respect. A burial recorded in a church ledger ink that outlived its author. I didn't ask for revenge, I asked for repair. Ballots went out, silence expanded until it had weight. The projector flashed numbers, a recall, a removal. A chance to choose structure over swagger. Devon stared at the floor, relieved and wrecked. The room didn't cheer, it exhaled. Outside, stormlight bruised the sky. The basin gulped overflow like a disciplined throat. The pool glittered on the hill, all performance, no authority. We filed our final briefs that night. Restore the historic drainage easement. Convert the temporary basin into a permanent vegetated treatment wetland. Place a conservation covenant over the burial polygon. Third-party monitoring for 10 years. Transparency and reform of fines. Fees and costs to the prevailing party. Sanctions for willful misconduct. I drove past the pasture that used to be ours and parked. The wind worked the reeds. A heron drifted low, slow, deliberate. Water chose the path we'd given it, that was the point. Not to humiliate a board, but to force obedience from a system that thought it was a person. Law over chaos, memory over marketing. Tomorrow the judge would speak. Tonight the land already had. Courtrooms smell like dust and decisions. The gallery was full. Neighbors, reporters, regulators with folded arms, strangers who'd heard grave and HOA in the same sentence and came to see which one would blink. I carried the deed like a relic. Tessa carried a stack of orders as if the future had weight you could lift with paper. The judge read slow. You want that slowness, it means precision. Findings, he said, voice like a plumb bob. The association willfully violated stormwater regulations, concealed an unpermitted bypass, retaliated against a protected claimant, ignored credible evidence of historic burials. Each clause felt like a nail seating properly into old wood. Order, he continued. The historic drainage easement is reinstated in perpetuity and recorded against the property. Law hammered into deed. The temporary basin shall be converted into a permanent vegetated treatment wetland designed by a third-party engineer, monitored quarterly for 10 years with public access via boardwalk and interpretive signage. Humility engineered. Any overflow from the pool shall be routed exclusively through this wetland before controlled discharge to the creek. The pool just lost its crown. A conservation covenant shall be placed over the burial polygon. Under supervision of the county archaeologist and the coroner, test excavations may proceed. If human remains are found, reinterment shall occur at the claimant's chosen site with county honors. Dignity notarized. Civil penalties assessed to the association. Attorneys' fees and costs to the prevailing party. The room shifted, the math finally landing. As to Miss Mercer, he said, eyes steady, for bad faith conduct, discovery abuse, and retaliatory direction, personal sanctions are imposed and she is removed from fiduciary service in the association for 5 years. Not prison. But prohibition, the kind that feels louder. The gavel didn't slam, it settled. The sound was small, the effect was not. Outside, cameras clustered. I gave them one sentence that wasn't a victory dance. We didn't win to gloat. We won to set things right. The Dep inspector shook my hand like we shared a craft. Mr. Alvarez looked up at the clouds and nodded at nothing. Tessa exhaled, eyes bright for the first time since this began. Work started immediately. Excavators shaped the basin's bones. Stone weirs stacked like low, patient steps. Crews planted rushes, sedge, blue flag iris. The new board, temporary, cautious, voted to accept reforms. Transparent budgets, due process for violations, no predatory fines, mandatory compliance training, audited management. Policies replacing personalities. I walked the edge of the emerging wetland at dusk. The liner disappeared under soil and plants. Frogs would come. Dragonflies would patrol like little helicopters charged with peace. The pool upslope still glittered, but the glitter looked smaller. Water slid into the wetland with a sound I hadn't heard here since childhood, a hush that wasn't silence, a promise that wasn't a threat. I took the deed out one last time and touched the ink where my great-grandfather's name lived. The paper felt less fragile, not because it had changed, because the world around it finally matched what it said. Justice isn't a cheer, it's a rerouted flow. Paper isn't repair, people are. We showed up on a Saturday with shovels, work gloves, coffee in dented thermoses. Kids planted iris with hands they'll remember when they tell this story to their kids. Mr. Alvarez taught grade with a string between stakes. A tenth of a foot matters, he said, smiling like a teacher who loves his subject. The basin transformed. Liner hidden, soil breathing, first frogs, dragonflies hunting with the arrogance of small kings. The creek ran clearer, the way water does when it's respected instead of forced to lie. Under a blue tarp, the archaeologist opened a careful trench inside the polygon. No spectacle, no whispers, science and reverence, same tent. A button surfaced, then a coffin nail with a black bloom of time clinging to it. Everyone went still. Pastor Ruth closed her eyes. The archaeologist nodded once and called the coroner, then the court. We did it right, under protocol. Under prayer, the remains were lifted, intact enough to honor. The county blocked traffic for a small procession that felt larger than the town. Neighbors stepped out of doorways and placed hands over hearts without being told. The wind was gentle. The sky held, at our family acre, protected now by words no one can bulldoze. Pastor Ruth spoke names, dates, the promise a grandson made to a grandfather he never stopped hearing. I touched the new cedar marker. The grain was warm. Back at the subdivision, the caretaker board adopted bylaws that read like a fence against future malice. Owners get notice. Evidence is required. Cameras aren't crimes. Fines have caps and appeals. Stormwater is a discipline, not a suggestion. Compliance training isn't a slideshow, it's a standard. The management company opened its books. Numbers that used to hide suddenly looked shy under fluorescent light. Devin met me by the boardwalk one evening. He stood with his hands knotted, words stuck. I was part of it, he said. I'm sorry. You signed a statement, I answered. You testified, use your guilt as guardrails. That's how we keep this from rotting again. He nodded. A heron arrowed across the wetland and landed like it owned the place. Maybe it did, maybe ownership is just who obeys the rules you can't rewrite. Elaine resigned, no camera. No speech, a car door, a taillight, a silhouette that had run out of rooms where her voice filled the ceiling. I heard she volunteers at a legal aid clinic now. Maybe penance. Maybe pride redirected. Either way, not my story to finish. We set the plaque by the boardwalk, law over chaos. Water finds truth, good people can win, simple, heavy, true. The new brochure shows the pool and the wetland side by side, blue mirror, green keeper. Luxury and humility in one frame, finally honest. I went home, washed mud off my hands, and let the quiet in the house be a friend. Grief had turned into a place you can visit without drowning. Anger had turned into posts in the ground. Vengeance had become structure, justice is work. We're the workers now. A year later, the boardwalk wood is sun-silvered and smooth under 1,000 shoes. A sign greets fourth graders on field trips. Be an ETT Heritage Preserve, a community wetland. The ranger points at reeds and explains how water learns paths and people forget them. Then he points at the plaque and explains how people can learn again. The pool still sparkles. No one for bad joy. Kids cannonball, laughter ricocheting off condo glass. But on storm days, you can feel the neighborhood's eyes slide to the wetland first. The overflow travels like a practice sentence, pool to weir to rushes to outlet to creek. The sound is a hush, the feeling is relief. Luxury behaves because humility is in charge. I walk the boardwalk with my son. He's old enough to ask the question straight. Did revenge feel good? I stop. The wetland breezes the cattails. A turtle noses up like a periscope. Revenge felt sharp, I tell him, but it burns out. Justice felt heavy, it stays. What we built here, this is justice. We pass the flag where the longest GPR reflection once glowed on a screen. The ground is quiet, not because it's empty, but because it's satisfied. The cedar marker at our family acre stands in a square of sunlight. The name on it looks less like a fight now and more like a root. Neighbors wave on the boardwalk. The nurse who beat her wreath fine. The veteran whose chemo calendar now has only medical notes, no tow threats. The teacher whose driveway chalk drawings returned as a community art day where kids drew water cycles and egrets and a funny cartoon valve with a crown. The new board holds meetings that feel like rooms where adults live. Budgets projected on a screen. Enforcement discussed like a responsibility, not a weapon. A line in the agenda that used to be unthinkable. Cultural and environmental stewardship monthly report. Words, yes, but practices too, trash pickup schedules, planting days, monitoring dates. A link to the quarterly water quality report that reads like a report card we can all be proud of. We crossed an invisible river, not from anger to softness, from heat to structure, from humiliation to honor. The pool didn't die, it grew up, we did too. At home, I keep the deed in a drawer that slides smooth, not as a sword. As a promise, paper and wetlands, valves and votes, grief and cedar. We learn to hold more than one truth at a time. That's adulthood, that's community. If you're living under power that calls itself order while it breaks the rules beneath your feet, hear me. You don't need a louder yell, you need a better record. You need patience with teeth. You need rain that won't be lied to and friends who don't blink. You need law over chaos. Storms will come. Good, let them, they test work. They clean stories. This one ends with water moving where it should, a family name where it belongs, and a neighborhood that learned how to be decent the hard way. It ends with a boy asking the right question and a father answering without rage in his throat. It ends and it begins again every time clouds gather. If this journey moved you, drop a thoughtful comment. Which moment changed everything for you, and where in the world are you watching from? Like and share to push this story to someone who needs a blueprint.